Sully always carried a note in his wallet that said better to delay than cause disaster. On this particular day, his passenger plane had just left the airport when it hit a flock of birds. Both engines were damaged and lost power completely. The aircraft began shaking violently, but Sully didn't know the full extent of the engine damage. He could only feel the engine slowing down. Everything Sully did next was absolutely perfect. He first tried to restart the engines, but got no response. When the cabin lost electrical power, Sully didn't hesitate for even a second. He immediately activated the auxiliary power unit and restored electricity. Flight attendants told passengers to fasten their seatbelts and calmly explained they were just experiencing some turbulence. Following Sully's orders, the co-pilot grabbed the emergency checklist to find solutions for dual engine failure. Sully radioed the control tower to report their situation and request assistance. The tower immediately grounded all other aircraft and tried to help Flight 1549 return to the airport, but Sully knew they would probably have to make an emergency landing in the river. There was another airport nearby on the right side, but the plane was already too low to maneuver there. Sully announced over the intercom for everyone to prepare for impact. Flight attendants loudly instructed passengers to assume crash positions and keep their heads down. The control tower wanted them to land at the nearest airport, but Sully's 42 years of flying experience told him their only option was the Hudson River. After this communication, the tower lost radar contact with Flight 1549. Air traffic controllers kept calling, but received no response. Sully knew the nearest airport was at their 2 o'clock position, only about 7 miles away. He also knew that water landings had less than a 1% success rate. The radar showed no signal from Flight 1549 as the aircraft continued losing altitude. Passengers were panicking and praying for a safe emergency landing. Sully calmly controlled the aircraft and adjusted the angle for water impact. The plane touched down on the Hudson River without breaking apart. Sully had achieved a perfect water landing. Only one flight attendant suffered a minor leg injury. Sully quickly left the cockpit to help evacuate all passengers in an orderly fashion. The co-pilot was still in shock and couldn't move for several moments. The front door opened and the escape slide deployed while emergency exits were activated. Passengers moved onto the aircraft wings as the Coast Guard spotted them and called for immediate assistance. Air rescue teams were dispatched right away, and passengers were evacuated systematically. It was easy to forget this was actually a plane crash with less than a 1% survival rate for water landings. Behind each precious life were loving families waiting at home. Additional rescue boats and ships continued arriving to help stranded passengers. Sully risked his own safety by going deep into the flooding tail section to ensure no one was left behind. He returned to the cockpit, gathered important flight records, and was the last person to jump onto the escape slide. With support from multiple rescue teams, the operation was completed quickly. When Sully reached shore, he was deeply concerned about whether all 155 people aboard had been saved. Since rescued passengers were scattered among different rescue teams, no one could give him an immediate answer. At the hospital during his medical examination, union representatives brought him wonderful news. All 155 passengers and crew from Flight 1549 had been rescued successfully. A huge weight lifted from Sully's shoulders. News coverage was everywhere, and Sully became a national hero. However, what awaited him was intense scrutiny from the National Transportation Safety Board. He had saved 155 lives, but now found himself under investigation. The investigators questioned his decision, pointing out that dual engine failure was unprecedented. Engineers calculated that the aircraft had sufficient power to return to the airport. They wanted to know why Sully chose to land on water instead. Obviously, these engineers weren't pilots and hadn't been on the plane during the emergency. The lead investigator even questioned Sully's family stability and asked if he'd been having personal problems lately. Sully replied that he had no more troubles than anyone else and that nothing was affecting his professional performance. Sully faced enormous pressure from this investigation, which was typical behavior from airlines and insurance companies. They wouldn't stop until they found some fault with his actions. What should have been a celebration became a source of depression for Sully, who feared they might find something to destroy his reputation. Fortunately, all public news coverage remained positive. Constant media interviews and television appearances left Sully exhausted. During the second hearing, the co-pilot couldn't tolerate the investigators' attitudes any longer. He pointed out that without Sully's decision to land on water, they wouldn't have achieved these results. The investigators claimed Sully had simply followed standard emergency procedures. The co-pilot passionately defended Sully, explaining that he hadn't followed standard procedures at all. Instead, Sully had relied on experience and immediately activated the auxiliary power unit. The co-pilot emphasized that Sully made this his first action, when according to Airbus manuals, it should have been step 15. The co-pilot angrily stated that if Sully had actually followed those procedures, everyone would have died. Retrieved data indicated that one engine was still running, meaning the aircraft had some remaining thrust. The only uncertainty was the other engine, which was still being recovered from the river. Even assuming both engines had truly failed, investigators had conducted flight simulation tests using identical parameters from Flight 1549's accident. In the simulation, pilots successfully returned to the airport and landed safely. From their perspective, computers don't lie and data doesn't deceive. Sully began to doubt his own judgment and recalled that day's events. The aircraft struck a bird flock, causing dual engine failure, and sitting in the cockpit, he felt everything happening. Using 42 years of flying experience, he made calm decisions, skipped the emergency checklist, and immediately activated auxiliary power. He didn't attempt to return to the airport because he believed the parameters made it impossible. Flying over the densely populated city would have resulted in crashing into buildings. When cockpit voice recordings were ready, Sully would face his final judgment. He knew something wasn't right about the investigation, and the co-pilot firmly believed Sully had done everything possible. At a bar, Sully watched television coverage of the miraculous water landing. Since childhood, Sully had loved flying and learned from his instructor to maintain aircraft control regardless of circumstances. His instructor had also taught him something important about remembering to smile. Later, as a military pilot, his fighter jet developed engine problems during a mission. With black smoke pouring out, his wingman asked if he would eject, but Sully was determined to handle the situation. He gained altitude, used speed to maintain level flight, lowered landing gear early, and prepared for landing. Under Sully's perfect control, the fighter jet returned without damage, though ejection might have been the safer choice for most pilots. Hearing the word timing on television suddenly gave Sully an idea. He quickly contacted his union friend and asked for help arranging the flight simulation test before the hearing. Sully believed humans and computers had fundamental differences, and he was confident he could discover something important. If he was wrong, he would end his flying career. His friend agreed to try but warned it would require many phone calls, noting it was already 7:30 in the morning in France. On hearing day, Sully got his wish to observe the simulation test in advance, using identical parameters and conditions, including bird strike and dual engine failure. Two experienced pilots immediately responded and successfully returned the simulated Flight 1549 to the airport. A second group of different pilots also achieved successful return flights in their simulation. National Transportation Safety Board officials seemed confident, not understanding Sully's purpose, but Sully had found the breakthrough he was looking for. All tests had eliminated human factors from the equation. In real emergencies, people need time to assess situations rather than reacting instantly. The simulation pilots had skipped emergency checklists and immediately attempted return flights without any analysis or decision-making process. Sully's objections were logical and well-founded. He argued that if they were looking for human error, they should make tests more realistic. Sully requested 35 seconds of reaction time, and the simulation began again. After impact and dual engine failure, pilots waited 35 seconds before attempting to return to the airport. Both simulation attempts ended in failure, and the results were undeniable. Transportation officials lost their previous arrogance as cockpit voice recordings were played. The lead investigator's attitude completely changed, and he began expressing admiration for the captain. He acknowledged this was extraordinary performance and emphasized it wasn't a simulation. Sully confirmed that it definitely wasn't a simulation. The recovered engine showed extensive damage to inlet guide vanes and fan blades, proving dual engine failure had actually occurred and system data was incorrect. The lead investigator added his personal perspective after consulting with crew members, bird experts, and aviation engineers. After testing every scenario and interviewing everyone involved, he could state with absolute certainty that one unknown factor remained in the equation. That factor was Captain Sully himself, and removing him from the equation would cause the entire calculation to fail. Sully disagreed with this assessment, emphasizing it wasn't just his individual achievement, it was everyone's effort, including crew members, passengers, rescue workers, air traffic control, ferry crews, and police divers. They had all worked together to accomplish this, and everyone had survived. The film was based on a true story where Captain Sully saved all passengers on Flight 1549. As he said, every crew member was essential to the success. For Sully, he was simply doing his job.